One of the tragic illusions that many countries of the Third World entertain is the notion that politicians and civil servants can successfully perform entrepreneurial functions. Clearly, the Singapore government agreed, deeming it best to separate the managing of businesses from its regulatory and policy-making functions. This conviction is depicted in the form of an old ledger. At first glance, it appears ordinary, a simple record of bygone businesses. Yet it holds immense significance. This is more than a document. It's a testament to vision, resilience, a silent witness to a history in the making.
Temasek is a company rooted in Singapore, that has evolved over 5 decades, growing from a holding company to a regional and global investor, delivering sustainable returns over the long term. It is always investing with tomorrow in mind, so every generation prospers.
Temasek commemorates its 50th anniversary this year, standing tall as one of the world's leading investment companies. With a net portfolio valued at 389 billion Singapore dollars, its footprint spans the globe, with 13 offices across 9 countries worldwide, from New York to Beijing, London to Mumbai. But this global investment powerhouse was born from humble beginnings. Temasek was founded in 1974 to take over and manage state-owned companies previously under the Ministry of Finance. Singapore's economy was thriving, with double-digit growth in real GDP from 1966 to 1973, one of the highest rates in the developing world. The unemployment rate dropped from 8.9% to 4.5%, improving jobs, pay, and quality of life for Singaporeans.
From mangrove to metropolis has been the man-made story of Singapore.
But this was against the backdrop of the 1973 global energy crisis. The Ministry of Finance had to focus on tackling inflation and to manage fiscal policies. On top of that, the Ministry of Finance also had to manage an expanding stable of companies that was set up then to create jobs and promote growth.
The companies themselves started off in the early years of our independence. The government had to go in and start many companies because otherwise there was nobody who was doing that. We created the shipyards when the British left, Keppel and Sembawang. We had Malaysia-Singapore Airlines when we were inside Malaysia. After we split from Malaysia, after some time the airline also split up and then we formed SIA. DBS was actually started off a financing piece of EDB, and then that grew and it split off, it became a bank. So in the early years, the line between being a company and being the government was not quite so sharp as now.
The Singapore government in those early days had a number of companies which they had set up themselves, plus the assets which they had turned into commercial operations. And after a few years of operations, the government recognized that there is an inherent conflict between operating companies and being policy maker and a regulator. And so in 1974, the government decided to put all these companies under a holding company, Temasek Holdings.
The decision to set up Temasek may seem logical and practical, but its concept was groundbreaking. Singapore was boldly separating government policy making from running businesses. The government understood that Temasek needed to operate as an independent commercial entity to effectively manage its portfolio.
So obviously at the beginning in 1974, Temasek was an inheritor of companies that were built by the Singapore government. And most of these companies were built by either the Economic Development Board or the Ministry of Finance in the context of industrializing Singapore, in the context of catalyzing industries in Singapore, and also providing good job opportunities for Singaporeans.
The wisdom of the government in those days is that by transferring all these assets in Temasek's hand, it means that it, as government, would not interfere with the operations of Temasek as an investment company, with mixing it with, say, macro or even political interests.
Naming the new company was quick. 4 names were suggested: Colossal, Merlion, Solar, and Temasek. Then Finance Minister Hsien ticked Temasek. Derived from the Malay word tasik, meaning body of water, and the Javanese Temasek, signifying sea town. On 25th of June 1974, Temasek Holdings Private Limited was incorporated under the Singapore Companies Act. The line separating governance and business management was drawn. 35 companies worth 354 million Singapore dollars were now in Temasek's hands, and its portfolio was set to expand as the government fueled Singapore's growth. But what was Temasek's role in the early years?
At the time, we were just an investment holding company. We had to make sure that our role is clearly in a sense of governance, to make sure that the companies are well managed by themselves and by their own board of directors, so that the value will grow. Because if they don't do well, if we neglect our role as a shareholder, then I think we will be not doing justice to the assets.
Temasek has never interfered into the operations and business of its portfolio, and I think that mantra exists till today.
At the mouth of the Singapore River, you'll find the iconic Fullerton Hotel. But back in the 1970s, this building had a different vibe. It housed the bustling General Post Office along with the offices for the Ministry of Finance and related departments. To locate Temasek Holdings, you had to trek all the way up to the attic.
When we started Temasek in 1974, the Fullerton building is not quite like the super-duper 6-star Fullerton Hotel that you find there now. The lift would creak their way up and down. We used to take wagers, which one will come down first.
In its early years, Temasek's primary function was more about data collation than analysis. Staff were busy managing accounts, recording dividends, and handling procedural tasks like processing instruction letters and share transactions.
It was in the Ministry of Finance itself, just myself and 1 or 2 other officials. We were not full-time Temasek people, we were full-time government officials, the Ministry of Finance, and we took on this additional assignment of starting Temasek and nurturing it. Just 3 or 4 people doing the work for Temasek part-time. It was very low-key.
Its portfolio companies operated independently, often bypassing Temasek to directly approach the ministry for any needs. With many of these companies managed by senior and/or high-profile figures, attempts to exercise greater oversight of their operations were often met with little response.
It wasn't a spectacular success because each board considered itself the final authority. By and large, we had a good relationship and we didn't interfere with the running of the individual companies. There was a very fundamental concern. We decided we should adopt a hands-off attitude and let each board decide its destiny.
Despite its seemingly muted ambition, Temasek as a holding company eventually became the subject of much admiration and accolades. By the end of its first year, the companies it owned had a total net portfolio value of 426 million Singapore dollars. By February 16, 1977, a newspaper called it one of the top 5 companies in Singapore and Malaysia. This success meant Temasek was ready to become more active in investing and step out from the shadows of the Ministry of Finance.
Basically, the Temasek companies were under the Ministry of Finance, and the stewardship of those companies were more on an aggregated basis. They didn't really look and try and transform or restructure these companies. It was important that we try to, in most cases, size matters. So the whole nexus of the restructuring was how do you move in that direction.
In September 1979, Temasek announced that a high-flying senior civil servant from the Ministry of Finance would become its first general manager. Dr. Chua Yong Hai, with a background in chemical engineering, was charged with transforming Temasek from being an administrative investment holding company to becoming a more active portfolio manager and investor.
we were still somewhere between the second and the third world. And all we had to do was to see what the first world was doing, or maybe even the second world was doing, and emulate them. It was imitative. A lot easier than when you are now supposed to be in the first world, and imitation is not enough. You've also got to plow your own path. So that means a lot more creativity, innovation.
Well, I think that the people who have been in Temasek learned something from our founding leaders. And for me, the first thing that we learn from our leaders is what is our national purpose. And that has been articulated by Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. And he said, my business is the people's happiness. To achieve the happiness of the people, then we have to not just earn the returns that the government can use to spend on social programs for the country, but also the companies that we invest in, particularly in Singapore, that creates jobs and good jobs for Singaporeans. And the other lesson that we learned from our founding leaders, that we do things today with tomorrow clearly in our minds. In other words, we are not only doing things just for today, but we are doing things for the future and for future generations as well.